Laura Dekker holds the world record for being the youngest person to sail solo around the world. She began her journey in August 2010 when she was 14 years old and finished in January 2012 when she was 16. In this conversation, we talk about what prompted her to take on a voyage this challenging, how she navigated and eventually won her fight with the Dutch government, and how she plans to use the lessons she learned as a young sailor to parent her own kids. I think you'll really enjoy this one. Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
So excited to talk to you today. So let's start with, you've lived a really remarkable life and had a very remarkable career. To some, it may be a career. To you, I think it's just life.
Yeah.
So you say that you sailed with your parents for the first 5 years of your life. Then by the age of 6, you're already in the water. By 7, you were racing competitively. And by 10, you bought your own boat with money that you had made in the last few years. What do you attribute for your love of sailing?
I think it's in the genes. I mean, yeah, my dad loves sailing. My mom, not so much. She loves living on the boat, but not so much the actual sailing. And yeah, I don't know. I've just always loved that.
So when you were 6 years old, your parents got divorced and you were asked who you wanted to live with, which seems like kind of an impossible decision for a 6-year-old. Who did you choose, and how did that decision kind of change your life trajectory?
It's somehow, it didn't seem hard for me at the time at all.
Why not?
Which sounds a bit mean, but I think kids' minds are pretty simple in that, especially young kids, they just want to be with their parents. Like, that's all they want. They want to have the closeness. And when we got back, or when we got to the Netherlands, for me then the first time, my parents both started working, but my mom was just gone all the time. I don't know, she would work, but then she would go out and do her own thing. Mm-hmm. Which in hindsight, like, I get it. They were on a boat for so long, and she finally had this newfound freedom of, hey, I can go and do all these things and have friends and be stationary. So it was actually my dad who was with me and my sister for most of the time. Like, he would go and hang out with us, he would play with us, he would take us to the boat, he would take me to work. Because I was born in New Zealand, I wasn't like a Dutch citizen, so I couldn't go to school, which is super ironic. So my parents fought for like a year to actually get me in the school system, and then we fought a year to get me out. It's kind of ironic, but in that year that they were trying to get me allowed to go to school, I was going with my dad to work, who was being a taxi driver for like disabled people at the time, so I could sit in front. So I just got to spend a lot of time with him. And I think that's really the main reason I chose my dad. Besides, I do think, I can't vividly remember it, but I do think an aspect of it was the love of boats that I already had at that age. Like, I love boats. I knew I loved boats. So that's something I could talk about, something we bonded over. And of course, I knew he was building the boat and I was interested in that. So, as a 6-year-old mind, you're like, cool, boat, I love boats, let's go live there. Yeah.
And that's what went into your thinking at the time.
Yes.
And so, okay, I want to get back to this later in the interview, but you mentioned it took a year to get you into the school system in the Netherlands. What was your experience like as a young kid in the traditional school system?
Yeah, I think so. Primary school for me was, I really loved it. It was fun. I was learning a lot. I love learning. I always have. So yeah, for me, primary school was really fun. And I went to 2 different primary schools, because first we went where my parents were still together, and then of course they divorced and we moved. So I went to another school for the rest of my primary school. But that was fun. So where for me everything really went bad was when I went to high school. That was really dramatic. I felt like the first 2 years I was just free doing stuff, and I was bored. I didn't get answers on the things I really wanted. So, I love to learn if I see the purpose of learning something, but if I'm learning mathematics and I'm asking why I should learn it, and someone just goes like, "Oh, you just have to." I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
If they would have said, you're a sailor. For astronavigation or for just navigation in general, you need know mathematics. I would have been like, cool. And I would have learned it, which I didn't because they didn't say that.
Right.
I still had to learn it, of course. But yeah, for me, high school was just dramatic. Like there was no personal attention. They didn't care. They didn't really like give any reason to learn it. I really felt like I was just sitting there to like be off the streets or something.
Yeah, because I find it fascinating that you have these like two different modes of learning. Like you were learning in school, which is more theoretical, but then you were building a boat with your dad and you were learning actually by doing things. Yeah, which is like more of an apprenticeship model. So I'm fascinated how, the lack of personalization, you probably were doing math and science and understanding physics.
But but in a practical sense, like if you ask me about formulas, I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
I know what I need to know. But it has a lot to do with the teachers who just don't. Yeah, of course, there's a lot behind it, but I think the whole school system is it's very boxed, like it's very specific for a specific group of people, and if you don't fit in that, then there's nothing else. And I didn't fit in.
And can you explain how you and your dad would go about, like, how would he teach you things?
My dad is very much someone who just like throws you into the water and he's like, cool, swim.
Yeah.
He likes to just throw me into the deep while being there to help me. So he sees if I can figure things out, and then he will come back and we'll sit and we'll go, okay, so what went well and what didn't, and then we'll kind of get more into the theory of that. So with sailing as well, I'm really stubborn. So if there was a lot of wind and he said, well, you can't sail today because there's just too much wind, I'd be like, no, I can. Of course I can sail. So he tried to tell me why I wouldn't be able to because I was too light and the wind was too strong. And I said, oh, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Just go. I think that's...
So it's almost like trial by fire. He would throw you in, then you would ask questions and be stubborn, and then he would explain versus like starting with the theoretical.
Yeah, I think that's what worked for me, and I'm not saying that works for everyone, but that's what works for me. I first want to like feel it and know what I'm dealing with, and then if I go into the theory, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense because I experienced that didn't work.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So
and then
that's cool.
So at the age of 13, you sailed from Holland to England alone, but you didn't tell your parents that you were doing this, which is the ultimate rebellious thing. I think most kids are like, I'm not going to tell my parents I'm going to a party. You're like, I'm going to sail to another country. How did you do that? And what did you think was going to happen?
I didn't tell them because I didn't think they would agree, which of course is the main reason to not tell your parents something. I think it was like a short school holiday. I think it was like a week or 2 weeks maybe. It's been spring break. I don't remember the details, but I know I had a decent amount of time off school. So before that time, I spent quite a couple of weekends getting the boat ready. I mean, that wasn't suspicious at all because I was always on my boat and I was always working on it and I was always shuffling things around. So I think, my dad really didn't think anything of that. So I just kind of sneaked all this food on board and charts and everything that I needed. And then I just left in the morning when my dad was working. Just, made sure that I was far out at sea by the time he got back home. Yeah.
Did he know at all where you were?
Oh yeah, I left a note.
Oh, you left a note.
Yeah. Oh, he knew. Okay, a bit too late, but then he knew. And then of course he did get called up by the police in England. So yeah.
And then you got deported back, is that right?
Not really, actually. So the police in Lowestoft took me, and then they actually took the effort to bring me to like a child care, whatever, like somewhere where we put abandoned kids, or values kids, I don't know, which was all the way in London, by the way, which was like a 3-hour drive. It was absolutely ridiculous. In handcuffs too, for whatever reason.
In handcuffs.
Oh yeah. They I don't know. I guess I wasn't really particularly friendly or happy about the situation, so it might not have helped. And then he had to pick me up there, and then we went back to the boat. So basically what they said, like, okay, here she is, now she's your responsibility again, deal with it. But he thought, well, then, if you sail here, you can sail the boat back, and I'll see her and watch her. So he did that. And in the end, or later, he told me that, not like much later, he told me that he really hoped that would kind of put me off ocean sailing, because the North Sea is not a nice place to sail in general. There's just a lot of ships, foggy. It was spring, so it was still really cold. And on the way there, I had no wind and thick fog. But on the way back, I had a lot of wind, and most of it on the nose. So it was rough. And he thought, well, if she does that, then she'll be over it. But it did the opposite for me. Yeah. It was just like, okay, this was cool. Next, what am I going to do next?
So you liked the challenge aspect of it?
Yes, I love challenges. Yeah.
Did your dad's response to that surprise you? Because it's so interesting, like thinking about it now as a parent, I'm like, I would be so mad, and but like the way he handled it was like, okay, you got here, you're going to sail back, and hopefully that teaches you a lesson. I know the conditions may not be great. Maybe that will like teach you a lesson, put you off to this.
Yeah, I know. I didn't at the time. It really didn't surprise me, because I knew my dad, and I didn't think he would be really mad at me. Of course, like the usual kind of, you shouldn't have done that. Right. But at the same time, he was proud that I had actually done that, that I'd managed, and he'd seen how I prepared the boat, and that it wasn't just a reckless action. Mm-hmm. And he complimented me for that, which was cool. Awesome. And I think I did expect that. I wouldn't have gone if I knew he would have gotten really mad and chained my boat up.
Right. And it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think that's not, now that I'm a parent, I think it's hard, but I do see how that's the right way to go about things. Because if you would have gotten really mad, like he realized that sailing was my life, that's the only thing that I really, really loved. And taking that away from me would have just made me more angry and more resentful. It would have not, I wouldn't have wanted to talk to him anymore. I would have just fought, which is what every teenager, what every child would do if you take something away that they love. And I think it's a mistake that we as parents make really often, that we take kind of the wrong things away from them, or have the wrong reaction in times where we should actually compliment them, because yes, they did something rebellious, but they also thought about it. But
you left a note. You definitely thought about it.
Exactly. Like it's hard, and I know that now. But I just think my dad is really brave.
That's really interesting. And the other part that stood out to me was like, getting taken away in handcuffs to London. Like that's such a dramatic response on like the police's part, but that didn't deter you.
But I'm not really big either. Like I was just tiny. I was just so small. I think I was like 145 or something meters. I don't know what it is in feet, but yeah. I'm small.
How old were you? You were like 11?
I was 13 when I
13. That's right.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's right. And so like this wouldn't be the first time that you challenge authority, but we'll get to that next. So you decided that you were then ready to sail around the world alone. Can you tell me the moment where you thought, you know what, this is a great idea. I really want to do this by myself.
Yeah, it was actually when I sailed back from England. That was although not the by myself, I think that wasn't defined, but that's the moment where I decided I wanted to do it now. Like that I didn't want to wait for years, or that I was ready to do that, because I kind of figured I could sail up and down to England 100 times, or I could like sail to France or Denmark, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, well, yeah, why not kind of put all these back and forths behind each other, and then I would be in like the Canary Islands, which sounded so much cooler and warmer. Yeah.
So so that's really interesting. So, your dad thought it would have the opposite effect. To you, it was like, I can do this now. Is it because it gave you the confidence to say, I know I'm young, but I know I can do this?
I don't know. I never really felt like I know I can do it. It's more of a, I don't really know. I just knew I had to do it. Like it was more of a, it was very clear in my mind that that's what I needed to do, that was what I needed for myself. Because also in that time, I did get more and more unhappy in school and kind of in just everyday life. I always have had a really good relationship with my dad, so we were close, but I really didn't like this whole high school thing where people were just trying to be popular and parties. And I know I'm rebellious, but I think in a completely different way than most of the teenagers in my school were. And I did not, I don't know, I did not feel that. I didn't like it. And teenagers can be so mean as well. This age, 13, 14, 15, it's so hard, and people are so mean to you, especially if you're kind of like an outcast, if you're a weirdo, which I definitely was. So I was not happy at all. Like I did not feel, I have friends, but not that close. I thought I would miss them. Like I didn't feel like I had anything that I was going to miss.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just, I don't want to say an escape, but it was very clear for me that that's what I needed to do. Like I was either going to waste my entire teenage years in school being completely unhappy, or I was going to go and do what I wanted to do. So it's, for me, that's the real reason. It wasn't a record or whatever. It was just, I just had to do it. I just knew in my mind that was the solution to, I don't know, figure myself out.
Yeah. I mean, spending so much time alone, I think definitely can help you figure yourself out.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
So you kind of further developed this idea, and then somehow you told someone, and then somehow your plans like ended up in the media. And after it was in the media, the government heard about it and they weren't very happy with this idea. No. and you were like, I'm going to go up against the government instead of saying I'm not going to do this. So what was that like, going up against this, massive institution?
It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, besides maybe sailing for 6 months while I was pregnant. But
oh gosh,
besides that, I think it was insane. But I didn't really have a choice, because it wasn't a court case if I was allowed to sail around the world or not. They actually took the responsibility of my parents over me away. They just took that. And there was a time where I actually had to live with like foster parents. So really? I was allowed to be at home. So for me, it wasn't a fight of whether I could sail or not. I mean, this was so much more than that. It was actually, they were attacking my dad, my parents, my family for being bad, and even like thinking of allowing me to do that, which of course, that is my responsibility, because it was my dream and now they are being attacked. So I was not going to let that go. And I was definitely, if anything was going to happen, I was going to live with my dad and not with some weirdo people that I didn't know. So it wasn't about sailing around the world. It
Wow.
was just a lot more than that.
So I didn't know that. So that means that like once the Child Custody Protection Services got involved in the Dutch government, they actually took you and you had to go live with foster parents instead of your
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there were a lot of court cases, and that happened during one of them. But yeah, so many absolutely insane things happened, and also things were just like, it's just not right. Everything felt so unfair, and just out of proportions. And I was really angry. I was really confused. I was really depressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely the worst moment, the worst period. It took a whole year, the worst period in my life, where I went from already being unhappy with the society I was living in to absolutely resenting it and completely hating it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because from the articles that I read, it almost seemed like you were they wanted to make you an example for future people who are going to attempt this. So the biggest criticism that I saw like in the media was, how young is too young, and that people assumed you were just doing it to get the record of being the youngest person to sail around the world. But that's not why you did it, correct?
That's not why I did it. I mean, I ended up alone because there were literally no friends who wanted to come with me, besides maybe not being allowed to come, but they didn't even want to.
Right.
And then, my parents were working, my dad's boat wasn't finished. It just made sense. Like it was my personal challenge. I just had to do that somehow. It felt really right to me. But yeah, the media that was absolutely insane. What they would write and say, and you're suddenly not a person anymore. You're just this discussion
caricature. Yeah.
Don't care that you have feelings at all. Like I don't think they even think about it. It's I see it. It's not just me, of course. It's a lot of people who have been in attention, like Greta Thunberg as well. She was really young, and if you see with people write, I'm like, God, people, it's this is a human being who's just trying her best. Why do you have to be so mean? But I know people are. So yeah, that was a really quick lesson in media and grown-ups and judges and courts. And
so at what point, this goes on for about a year, at what point is the government like, okay, you can do this now? Or did they never actually say that?
They did. We moved to another part of the Netherlands because that's where we bought my new boat, or new whatever, where we bought the boat that I used to sail around the world in. And we moved there because it had so much work to fix up that it just made sense to move there. So, and because we did that, it went into another court and into another like district. So there were other judges and they just looked at it completely different.
Got it. Was part of the reason to move for the court to maybe kind of reanalyze, or no?
No, not really. I mean, it just made a lot of sense for the boat. But that actually turned out to be, a really, really good move because those judges were looking at it from a completely different angle. And where before the childcare, we're always like, oh, let's do this like behind closed doors and sneaky and record everything. And these people were like, let's just open this. Like the world needs to like know what's going on here. And that made a really big difference. So they they actually looked at us. So it still took, I think, 1 or 2 trials, but then they gave the responsibility back to my parents, who then, of course, then it was their choice again. It's not like the judge said, oh yeah, she can sail around the world. They just were like, fine, the parents can decide. They're saying like they know what they're doing. That's basically what they said.
And what did your parents think of the idea?
Well, they didn't like it. I think especially my mom in the beginning had a really hard time with it. She's not a sailor. She is afraid of the ocean. She just gets seasick, so she doesn't understand the passion, I think, that I have for it. Which makes it even harder. I think if Tim would go and race cars, I'd be like, okay,
right.
no idea. Whereas if he would sail, I would feel totally comfortable because I know what he's doing. But my dad was also not really jumping up and down from excitement. But they both did realize that if they would just say no or try to keep me back, that I would try to find a way to go anyway, because this like need to do it was so deep inside of me that there was nothing that was going to stop me. And I was really clear about that too. So they just kind of figured it was better to help me.
And is there something that you were hoping to get out of it? Like you talk about this need to do it, like I had to do it. Yeah. Was there a personal reason, something you wanted to discover about yourself that maybe...
I think I mostly just wanted to be happy again. I wanted to... My only happy place at that time was being at sea, like being on the water. That's when I would sing out loud and be happy and actually somehow make sense of everything that was in my brain. So that's just what I was longing for. Just longing to be on the ocean, be able to think. And I got a lot more. I got a lot more, but I just wanted to see the world. I wanted to know what else was out there. I wanted to figure out what I thought in the world, what my places in the world. I think those were the main goals. Very typical teenage goals.
Yeah.
What am I doing here? Why am I here? What am I going to do? Yeah.
That's awesome. Laura, I love that. We both had similar views of the world as teenagers. I just did it by like writing in a journal. You were like, I'm going to sail around the world.
I also wrote a journal though.
You did. That's true. So in 2010, you were 14 years old when you set sail. Were you nervous about doing it alone?
Oh, yeah. I was really nervous. Yeah, I remember the first week actually that I was out at sea. I was one big nervous wreck. I wasn't even able to sleep.
Wow. It was just adrenaline and nerves.
Like, yeah. I was like super happy. I felt on top of the world, but I was also, I think I was like double checking everything. I went from like chart and checking the radar and then the sails and the wheel and around me back to the chart. Wow. But yeah, I would just go around checking everything in circles without resting.
And so while you were on the boat, were you able to communicate with anyone externally?
No. I had a satellite phone for emergencies.
Yeah, but you weren't using that.
No, I wasn't. No, I used it once and it was really not an emergency, but it was one of those moments where it just went blank and went like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. And I used it once a day to send my blog home, which was super duper annoying because the satellite phone kind of works like the phones from that time, which by now are kind of, where you have to like press if you want to have the C, you go like bleep 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 and then bleep bleep and then write an entire blog like that, and then it would go connection failed. Oh. It didn't send.
Oh gosh.
I have to try again. So I did that, and then my dad would either send back cool received, or sometimes he sent me a weather update. Like if there was really something that I needed to know, he would send that. But besides that, not really. Yeah.
In your book, you have kind of almost journal entries that you wrote while you were on the boat. But how did you cope for so long with like being alone, just the loneliness aspect of it?
Especially with everything that happened the year before I set sail. I was just so happy to be left alone. I was just, I didn't want to have to deal with anything or anyone in the world. I was I was happy on at sea. And that kind of reflects, I think, as well in the journey I made. In the beginning, I was still a bit nervous, and I really, really wanted to see other cultures and kind of meet local people. So I stopped a lot and spent a lot of time actually getting to know the locals and getting into those cultures. But as the journey went on, I just did longer and longer passages until I actually went from Australia in one straight line to South Africa, and in South Africa, Caribbean, which are really long hops. And I really loved it. It was, I feel lonely at all.
So when you would stop at these places, how long were your stops normally?
From a couple of days to a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
The longest being like a week.
No, the longest was actually, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, because
Okay.
I had, like, in Australia when I had a lot of repairs to do, and I think in South Africa I also stayed 1.5, maybe even 2 weeks. But usually I didn't stay that long. Yeah.
Got it. And the purpose of these stops is, to kind of take a break, I'm assuming, but also like make repairs to the boat.
Yeah. The main reason for me was I just wanted to see the countries.
Yeah.
But then my boat was also not set up for long distance sailing. So a lot of the boats that go around the world nonstop or that do long distance sailing, they have a water maker, and they have, a lot of storage of food and things on the boat. And I didn't have any of that. I didn't have a water maker. I only had 150 liters of water and 200 liters of diesel. It was not set up for that. Which in the end I didn't care about anyway, because then I sailed 48 days without stopping. Isn't
it amazing the things that you care about when you're 14 versus now? Because I read that on the boat, you didn't have a fridge or a shower. So how did that work? You would just like, how? Okay.
Yeah. So saltwater bucket showers, which is great if you're in the tropics, and not so much fun if it gets cold, but you do it anyway. Yeah, so didn't have a shower at all, or warm water. And I didn't have a freezer, I didn't have a fridge, I didn't have a water maker. It was really, really basic, which is because I didn't want to have big sponsors. It was very much my trip, and I did this trip to, I think to find my happy place, to find myself.
Yeah, I noticed.
Sorry
to cut you off. Yeah, I noticed it really was not a commercial trip. I mean, you hear about these things, and I think I was surprised to find out that most of the media coverage for you was before. It was when the government tried to block you. It was not during or after.
Yeah, it was all like this really negative, like, she is insane. I hope she sings. She's crazy. Yeah. And after I was so fed up with the media that I didn't even want to talk to them. So
right.
But also it was never about that for me. I never wanted to have big sponsors. So I had sponsors. I had people who like really cared about the trip and cared about me. And that was so like the sails were sponsored, and the engine, and the dinghies. I had some things that were sponsored, which was really great because they're super expensive things. But I had no like monetary sponsors. So all the money I paid for the boat myself, and then the trip I paid for myself, which is very contrary. It's very different to how other teenagers have sailed around the world. I think I'm pretty much the only one who like completely just paid for my own stuff by actually working for it, instead of course finding sponsors. I don't want to say that finding sponsors is also working, and you have to pitch that, but I did it in a different way.
Yeah, it was a much more like bare bones operation.
Yes. Very solo.
Very solo. So your journey took, I read, 518 days or 1 year and 5 months. And you started when you were 14 and then finished when you were 16. So that means that you celebrated 2 birthdays by yourself.
Yeah, the
How
first one, the first one when I turned 15 was actually like really lonely. I was in Lanzarote and my English wasn't really that good, and everything was still so new that I didn't even really want to talk to anyone. So I put up like stuff for myself and
yeah.
got a muffin with a candle and went like, yeah. There was actually this really nice Dutch lady that I met who then took me to a beach who she didn't even know it was my birthday, but that was really nice.
That's awesome.
And my 16th birthday was a bit more festive because it was in Australia and my dad flew over. So that was really cool. Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, I read, I saw something in your book about like Christmas, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I'm not gonna like, I'm putting up decorations, but it's kind of weird."
Yeah, especially the time I spent it at sea. When I spent
Yes,
the
the
New Year's
second one.
Eve, it was very strange.
So what, being out there by yourself for over a year, what did you learn about yourself? Were there certain things where you're like, "Wow, I am completely transformed by this journey"?
Yeah, so I learned that I really cannot cook. Just can't. I don't know. I just don't get it. I also don't like it, so I probably don't put enough effort in. But otherwise, I think that I gained a lot of confidence through the trip, which to a lot of people seems funny because you need confidence to go on that trip. But I never really did feel that confident about anything. I'm actually rather like, oh, did I really check everything? It's just freaking out and checking it again and again. So the trip really did teach me confidence in that sense. I think I processed a lot of the things that just happened or things that happened. I thought a lot about how the world works and people and how, what I think about that or how I feel about it. So just having that time to process, which is super nice. And I do miss that now and then. Because life is pretty hectic and it goes so fast and you have all these amazing experiences and no time to think about it. So for me, sailing is really good to do that. I think seeing the different cultures and all the different people really made me realize how diverse the world is and that you don't have to be the same as like the country you grew up in, that there isn't really a standard, so to speak, that everyone in their own way is crazy, like a beautiful kind of crazy. We're all so different and we're all so unique. And through my travels and through meeting so many people, I realized that, yeah, I can just be me. And the people who can't deal with that, they just shouldn't deal with me then. There's enough other people.
Yeah.
And the people who can, that's great. But I shouldn't change myself to fit in somewhere. So that's something really great that I learned from a trip.
And what I think people who are listening to this would be very curious to know, what was the hardest part of the journey? Like, sailing, there's so many things and so many factors that could go wrong. Was there weather? Did you ever genuinely feel scared?
No, wow. I didn't. I mean, there were, I guess, scary situations or tricky situations, but I never felt really, really scared or like, oh, this is...
Do you attribute that to skill or something else?
Attributed partly to good preparation, partly to skill, maybe not necessarily as a sailor, but to be able to control your mindset, which in fact is probably the most important thing when you're a solo sailor, that you're able to, if you feel panicked or you feel like something is going on, that you're able to calm yourself down and think rationally. And that I did train. That's something I talked about with my dad a lot, and that we went through a lot of what if scenarios, and that helps to not kind of freak out when something happens. I think I also have to, in a way, attribute it a little bit to my teenage brain, because teenage brains just don't freak out that quickly as adult brains. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's different factors.
In what was like the most dangerous or trickiest situation you came across?
So for me personally, where I felt really stressed is the Torres Strait. It's a passage just north of Australia, between Papua New Guinea and Australia, and there's a lot of reefs, a lot of ships, and it's a long stretch. So it meant I was gonna have to be awake for, at least 2 days to be well clear on either side. So I was, and not just being awake for 2 days, but being alert and on top of it for 2 days. So I was really, really nervous about going through there alone. And then the wind it was just a lot of wind, and it was on the nose. So I had to like tack through this channel. And then my Genoa ripped in half. I was just so kind of like, why now? Of course, it always happens.
Yeah.
So for me personally, that was kind of a big step somehow. I think realistically, I would have to say the Indian Ocean. That's where I had the worst weather, the highest waves, where I was knocked down. So like where the mast hits the water. But I was mentally in a really good place. I was mentally really strong on that trip. So if I think back about it, it doesn't feel that scary or insane. If I look at pictures, I'm like, oh yeah, those waves are actually like bloody big.
Right. That's so interesting. It's like how you looked at it.
That.
Yeah. So my next question is a little bit about like, I think a lot about identity and the things that you attach your identity to. And so, for example, a lot of professional athletes, when they retire at an early age, they're like, oh my God, like what do I do now? And when I think about you, it's like, what do you do after you've achieved your biggest dream at such a young age?
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of had 41 days to think about that when I sailed from South Africa to St. Martin, which St. Martin was kind of like that crossing point. So that became somehow the official start and end point. That's where I would have officially sailed around the world solo. So to me, that was kind of, in a way, it was scary because yes, my entire life, I literally worked towards that goal and that would be over. But at the same time, I also realized I already made up my mind that I knew I was going to do this forever. Like, that was my life. I was so in love with the ocean and with sailing. I knew there was no way I was going to go back to the Netherlands and resume my normal life. That was not an option at all.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I figured I wanted to sail to New Zealand because I didn't get to stop there. I wanted to see where I was born. So those were kind of the main thoughts or goals I had when I arrived. And as life went on, as I journeyed to New Zealand, I think I did realize that sailing around the world for me was just the start. It kind of gave me the building blocks to be me. To go somewhere in the world. So it wasn't, I don't think of it as an end of something. For me, it was really the beginning of my life. And honestly, like everything I have now and do now has everything to do with that trip. So it changed my life very significantly.
It is very interesting because it's not like something, yes, it's something you did once, you sailed around the world alone, but sailing is not just, it continues to be a lifestyle. I'm assuming not just like a one-time event.
Yeah, for me, it's certainly not. I think in miles by now, I've sailed around 4.5 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So not like literally, but in miles. Yeah.
Right. So you are a mom now, you have kids. Would you let them undertake a similar endeavor?
Yeah, it's such a tough question. I would honestly shit my pants. That would be so hard. I really hope they won't. But
And why not?
because it's so hard. But in saying that, I know the gift that my parents have given me in allowing me not just to sail around the world, but in allowing me to chase my dreams always. Since I was this big. If I said, I'm gonna go do this, my parents didn't go like, "Well, that's a dumb idea." They went like, "Okay, cool. What do you think are the consequences of doing it?" Instead of, if someone or a kid, they would come and say, "Oh, I want to be an astronaut," instead of saying, "Well, maybe that's a bit high-fetched." I would have to know that I need to say, "Okay, that's great. What are the steps to achieve that? And can we do that together?" They might never become that astronaut. They might never go and do something as crazy as I've done.
Yeah.
But I really, really want to encourage them to be themselves and to actually do what they love to do. And that starts with this age. Like my oldest is 5, and he has dreams and he has goals and he has things he wants to be. And I just need to be there to encourage that, to be there for him. So I don't have to be like, "Yeah, great, go and do that," but at least not push it down and help him learn how to do it, I guess, like how to achieve it.
And that's one of the final things I wanted to ask you. Like, you very much learned about sailing through doing it. For me, journalism, like I could take all the writing classes in the world until you're interviewing someone or you're presented with an ethical situation that you have to decide how to proceed. Like, you don't know what you're going to do. So it's all about doing it. And I think there's a lot of parents that I know that are somewhat, frustrated with the modern education system. That, like, there's companies that are popping up that are rethinking it. How are you planning to do it with your own kids? And are you already taking steps to, like, maybe teach them to be more entrepreneurial minded?
Well, I hope so. So actually what I do now is we sail with kids and with teenagers on a bigger ship, and we take them on long programs, so like 6 months. And I'm not leaving my kids behind. So my kids are joining those trips. So they're already through different nationalities of the teenagers that join us, learning a lot about culture differences through the places that we go to. So they have a lot of that input, languages, and just in general, like history and places and culture. So yeah, they learn a lot through that. And I think that's great. And seeing a lot of options, every teenager is different. So they can be like, "Oh, cool. They really like that. And they really like that." So I think it's kind of cool that somehow the groups that we don't take big groups, so maximum 10 teenagers. So it still feels a bit like a big family. And they like our kids as well, because it adds to that. Little kids just have the funniest ways of saying things. If the teenager kind of grumpy or fed up with each other, Tim will walk in and be like, "Well, you guys are awkward," or something. And then everything is like fine, and just laugh and be like, "Oh yeah, okay, why were we making such a big deal out of it?" So it's
right.
The whole dynamic, I think, is really cool. And so yeah, I'm just super grateful that I'm able to do that, and I'm able to give other teenagers the same experience, that, well, not exactly the same, but at least a part of what I experienced as a teenager. And it really does give them a lot of the same values and things that I learned. So they usually do come away with more self-confidence and teamwork, communication, of course, on the boat as well, more of an understanding of what they want. So that's, it's really, really cool. I love doing that. And then being able to take my own kids to be there is, of course, it's absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. And my last question for you is, what does the word success mean to you?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. So I think for me, the word success, it means if you're doing something for yourself that makes you really satisfied and you're really happy. That's success. If you're At least that's how I define it. If I'm like, yeah, I'm happy what I'm doing, I'm grateful for everything I have, then I think I've achieved success, or I've had a successful day. Just means I'm happy with what I did.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
All it takes. And it is a big part of it is simply being happy with what you have. That's
Awesome.
we're humans. We'll always strive for more, but we need to realize also and be grateful for what we have in the moment.
Awesome. That was a great interview. Thank you so much, Laura.
Gladly.